Searching the web for the most talented, creative, and intriguing independent authors.
The Emit Blackwell Show, diving into the creative minds of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and paranormal authors. Their fantasy is our reality. Hello, thank you for joining me here on the Emit Blackwell Show. Before we begin, I would like to thank you and remind you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. On this episode, I will be speaking with author Lynn Lamb. We explore character development, share some of our favorite genres, and talk about how she approaches her story development in a unique and visual way. Lynn hails from California, and more specifically, Steinbeck country. She has published numerous books. For example, Lullaby the Dead, Book 1 of the Opus of the Dead series, Monte Vista Village, Survivor Diaries Book 1, The Beginning at the End of the World, Survivor Diaries Book 2, Moving Mountains, Survivor Diaries Book 3, Frozen Webs, Survivor Diaries Book 4, Wanderers on the Winds, Survivor Diaries Book 5, The Oxymoron of Still Life, Mechaniclism, and she also co-authored The 12 Terrors of Christmas. So, without any further ado, let's explore the surreal mind of author Lynn Lamb. Resplendent Chaos and Graceful Dysphoria. Chapter 28 of Lullaby of the Dead by Lynn Lamb. The music did not come from the ballroom that night. It came from the most unlikely of places, the library. It was like nothing I had ever heard, yet familiar. It crested through the highest notes before plugging into the lowest echoes, vibrating through my heart like a knife. I gathered my violin and bow and played the notes back. Some of the chords were foreign, and I was unable to replicate them. It beckoned me on a cellular level. It was resplendent chaos and graceful dysphoria. I had to know what it meant. I did not bother with clothing. The others were at the nightly party, and I would be alone. The room with the stacks of tomes I craved was colder than usual. I entered under the assumption that the music came from the she-monster who lived there. We had developed an unspoken pact not to acknowledge one another. It needed to be our shared space, or something catastrophic would come of it. My powers were not yet strong enough to overtake her. Perhaps my instrument playing in consonance with hers would lessen the chasm between us. I slunk shelf to shelf on my mission. There are many shady corners and unrecognizable dark shapes to explore, but none appeared to be her lanky silhouette, part naked female, part cow skull. After sweeping the room thoroughly, my bow moved along the strings. I stood perplexed. Nothing vaguely human could have created that music. Tearing noises followed fluttering hummingbird wings. The mind that produced it had to be turbulent. So many paradoxical notes crescendoing with force into pure joy, and dire hate made me dizzy. I could no longer keep up with the duet. I abandoned my violin on the floor. I sat shivering in an armchair, my sensitive nipples painfully stiff from the freezing air. Pulling my knees to my chest provided no warmth because blood no longer flowed through my veins. I waited and listened while the music ensnared me wholly. The shadow of the two shoeless feet appeared high on a far wall. Without forethought, I jumped from my seat and padded towards them as the apparition slid down in slow increments until it revealed its owner swaying on a rope wrapped around his neck. In the moonlight, from the never-present moon, Sideburns emerged from his shadow like a demented Peter Pan. He climbed the noose until it gave way and slipped out of its once lethal confinement. "Why don't you cover yourself? Got no shame?" he asked. "I have nothing to be ashamed of. This is my natural form. It was how I was born and how I died." The music lowered in volume until it was just a nagging noise in the distance. I watch you in the water, little mermaid. What are your thoughts when you are submerged? As he spoke, his accent, a tinge of Spanish mashed with a smidgen of the South, dissipated until it disappeared. Does it matter? I asked, matching his question with another. I suppose not. You know, you can't beat the devil. Am I in competition with him? I asked coyly. That's what death is. My great-great-great-great-grandson, who is named after Naston House, did not understand that. He will. And who is he? I demanded. Oh, dear. You know him well. He liberated you from your life. With that, he blinked away. Before the words could penetrate my mind, I felt thick, gooey liquid bubbling up around my feet, rising without mercy. Soon enough, the blood-blue tide swept me away with the debris of all the incredible stories surrounding me. I opened my mouth to scream, but it was met with gurgling as I sank. It was unlike the refreshing pool I had created. Its force pulled me, violently, to the depths, as I struggled uselessly to propel to the surface. My body was being sucked beneath the library floor. What lay there, I did not know. Is this how the others vanished? I wondered. With miraculous timing, the bloody river waned until it was nothing but drippings from the furnishings and puddles. Serene stood in front of me. You saved me. Why? I asked, as I flicked the goo from my hands. She turned, and rather than poofing away, she walked through the library door without answering. I felt as if the walls were going to press inward until I was a flattened mass. The claustrophobic environment of the house mixed with the emotions of the close call minutes before until I was unable to stand it. The stairs stood intact as I jogged down them. In the crevices of my mind, I wondered who was using their energy to keep up with the banister's appearance. Too focused to worry about something so trivial, I tossed it from my thoughts. The presence of evil followed me and watched as I grabbed the door handle. I could feel its ogling, wicked eyes on me, my skin crawling with the sensation. I shook the door with a strength I thought impossible after the strenuous episode in the library. Let me out, you bastard! I screamed at whatever force kept me locked in the hellish Naston house. Why do you think you have the right to keep us here? What did I do that was so terrible I need to be tortured? Tell me! My commotion and screaming at the invisible beast brought the other prisoners of the house running to the foyer. Not again, Landry. Have you lost your mind? Said Bernice Justina, the tart from the knitting ladies' gang. Garner your control and conduct yourself as a lady, and for heaven's sakes, put on some clothes. This is disgraceful behavior. The blue blood still covered me from head to toe, and nothing was showing. I kept banging my fists on the door, but it made no difference. I conjured an axe and attempted to fragment the wood, all the time knowing there was solid, impassable concrete on the other side. Landry, let me take you, Ben began. He was cut off by Topanga's steady hand, rising and signaling not to come any closer. My mentor stayed at my side, waiting for me to end my unwinnable battle for escape. He conjured a Native American woven blanket and placed it over my shoulders. My axe did not make a dent. Other spirits had probably tried before, but I refused to quit until my body defied my mind's stubbornness. My audience watched until I could no longer lift my exhausted arms. I crumpled to the ground and wailed. All right, and we are back from that extremely surreal excerpt, and I have the author here, Lynn Lamb. Hi, Lynn. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So that was from Lullaby of the Dead, Book 1 of the Opus of the Dead series. Could you tell us a little bit about what was going on in that? That was kind of surreal and different.
Well, we find our character, she's come into a fairly surreal situation. She's trapped inside this house. She's learning how to deal with not only being dead, which she is now, but also learning how to interact with other characters in the book and how to use whatever natural powers she might be bringing with her in depth, and she finds herself in a library, and I tried to incorporate a lot of the musical theme there because it is the Lullaby of the Dead, from the Opus of the Dead. She does play the violin, and I do try to play that off of her, whatever she's experiencing. If she has her violin, those feelings, those emotions are coming through the music she's playing at the time, and she's having this encounter with the villain of the story, and she's watching him come down and he's showing her a little bit of his death, how he died, and speaking with her, and she's going through and saying, hey, let's kind of get to know each other here, and I've been watching you, and she's realizing that she hasn't been as overt as she had hoped she was, and that she doesn't really understand all of the aspects of what's going on around her yet.
Wow. So it's now you have the Opus of the Dead series. Does the next book, will that actually incorporate more musical things, or is it the same characters that are going to be involved?
Same characters, and music is going to be involved all the way through the series. This is how, in many ways, this character has found she could express herself. In life, she was an uptight businesswoman. Of course, she did play the violin, but it wasn't an important aspect of her life. But it was one little way of getting out of her very staunch lifestyle, where she's very driven. She's a very driven businesswoman, and you see that she's not maybe even that ethical, and she needs something in her world that can bring her peace. And she doesn't know how to do it in life, but she is incorporating her musical abilities in death, and seeing how she can manifest them into becoming a better person.
Now, I have a question, too, for you, because obviously you are trying to describe audible things in a visual sense, okay? How do you do that as a writer, describe music in words?
I listen to music while I'm writing. I listen to it quite a bit, actually. I have in the book that I'm writing now, which is the next in the series, Business of the Dead. I just finished a Native American musical scene, and I listened to every single thing. I read up on what the different instruments were meant to represent. And I did the same thing when I did Lullaby, when I did those scenes with Lullaby. It's what was I feeling as the writer, as the author, and how that might be interpreted by the character, because I'm nothing like this character. My other series, I'm far closer to what those characters were, but not in this one. So it was a matter of saying, hey, how would she really be translating this music in her mind? What is she hearing? What do the notes mean to her? And hopefully it came across.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I'm reading just the excerpt, I was very surprised at the way you described the music. And if anybody's out there listening and you're thinking about looking into the Opus of the Dead series, check into just the fact that she describes music in such a way that if you were somebody who wasn't able to hear, okay, say you were somebody who was deaf or partially deaf, hearing or seeing the words that Lynn actually writes is pretty amazing, because it does give you a sensation. Music gives us a sensation, and you did a very good job on that, Lynn. I appreciate that.
Thank you. That's a huge compliment. I really appreciate it, Emit. I mean, those scenes were something I put quite a bit of time and thought into, so thank you.
Well, I mean, and that's another thing, too, that I'm thinking about right now, because you're out in Steinbeck country. Your characters do have a sense of dialect, just like Steinbeck did. Did you find it difficult to kind of build up the dialect for those characters?
Certain characters more so than others. As somebody who did grow up in California, the Spanish dialect is very common here. But when I went to write the Irish dialect, I had a lot, and another character, I had a lot more trouble with that one, because it's not something I'm used to hearing on a daily basis. And so I did contact some Irish people and said, how did this come across to you? Did this make sense? One of my editors really helped. He helped me focus in on which type of Irish accent, because in Ireland there are so many different dialects. And it actually would have been more from where that character story was from, more of a British Irish sounding to it. So yeah, that one was a lot harder, but I did enjoy some of the other ones, such as the Spanish accent.
And somebody like me who does these kinds of excerpts, you can easily fall from British to Scottish if you're trying to do an Irish accent, because it's so in between, and it's like you can fall into one or the other. And in some parts of Ireland, it is that way, and in other parts of Ireland, it isn't. So it's very difficult of a dialect to do, but within words, you're able to describe those things, and that's really good, because most people will play it out as just straight American English or straight British English without thinking of all the nuances of their language that makes it what it is, you know?
Exactly. It is a very tricky thing. I would say that you have to be very careful when you're writing. If you're an author and you're trying to do accents, I try not to put in such a heavy accent all the way through. I mean, I try to sprinkle it in.
And that's another thing too with trying to write with accents and dialect, is it's very easy to stereotype people. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing in the literary world, because in a lot of cases it does help the character relate to whoever you're trying to describe. My thing is how do you do that? How do you differentiate between stereotyping and actually building up a unique dialect? Do you people watch?
Oh, all the time. Any writer's going to be a people watcher. But I was very cognizant of not bringing any stereotypes, and in fact, I go against the grain on many of the stereotypes. I think I try it because I don't think any one person embodies a stereotype. Yeah. And so to me, it's more important. Yes, of course, there's a certain way somebody will speak. I have a California accent, and that's not a stereotype. But if you're doing somebody a poor Southern person, you could easily go into a bad place there.
Yeah.
When you're the accent. So that's why I did. Like I said, I contacted friends from Ireland, and I listened very carefully, and I spent a great deal of time on YouTube listening to Irish people and thinking, how do you spell that? You know, like, to me, there were definite things like the dropping of the T and it sounding more like a D sound when the word the, if you're talking about an Irish person. And you don't want it to come in too much again. You don't want to take away from what that character's saying, but then again, that is part of who they are. So it's a balance.
And it reveals so much about your character to the reader without the reader having to have too much of a backstory. It's a great way to present the character in the way that they are, because, there is going to be some stereotyping within books, but when the dialect starts pouring through on a character just the way Steinbeck used to do, you could tell the origin of that character within that dialect, and it was just so amazing. You could just feel the characters, and you'd be like, oh, I know somebody like that, or I know somebody who's similar to that, or I've been in a situation where I've heard somebody talk like this, so I almost kind of know their background. And then when the background is revealed, it's either a huge surprise or it's exactly what you thought was going to happen, which is good in either case. But yeah, it's a great way to build up characters, and I mean, that's excellent. Now, I do have a couple of other questions, because you do have such a long list of books. You have the Opus of the Dead series, you have Monte Vista Village, you have The Beginning of the End of the World, the Survivor Diaries. Now, you do have quite a bit of writing on the Survivor Diaries. What is the Survivor Diaries all about?
The Survivor Diaries are 5 books. It's a complete series now. I just finished the last one last year. It is a global nuclear war scenario. What would you do kind of thing. Stemming back to a very long history of my own of fear of nuclear holocaust. And I think everybody thinks, what would I do? If I were at home and a bomb dropped on me, where would I go? What would I do? If I knew a little in advance, like the characters in Monte Vista Village, they did know a little in advance of it coming in, and they were able to go and buy certain items they would need to survive indoors. You have to stay indoors for a period of time if you don't want to get sick. And you're not really sure what kind of bomb dropped, and you're just trying, it's truly surviving. It is written from the first-person point of view in a diary format, so that's a little different and fun. Have fun playing with that. These characters are in a place very near and dear to my heart, which is Monte, California, and the surrounding areas. And I really just said, I know what's in my neighborhood. What would I do to my neighborhood if this were to have happened? And it was a glaring reality that I didn't enjoy facing. I have fun with the Opus of the Dead series because, death, we really don't know what's going to happen in the afterlife, but we kind of do have an idea. This is hard science fiction. We have an idea. We know what could happen.
Well, half of the science fiction out there is just going to become reality in real life. I'm waiting for a park full of dinosaurs here soon, but but yeah, I mean, with this dystopian society, okay, when you have any kind of dystopian society, once things fall apart, things start to build back up again, and you're able to build these subcultures, and you're able to build up these own political groups and all these different things that happen, that it almost kicks you back into the Middle Ages where they have to start building up these little empires again. Did you find that doing that kind of thinking on a daily basis, looking at the world the way it is, and you say, wow, if this were to fall apart, I know that there'd be a group of people doing this, and I know there'd be a group of people doing this,
Absolutely. In fact, there are classes of people who start to emerge. And this story is about one neighborhood and how they begin a government, almost a caste system, not quite a caste system, but a government system. And the main character becomes the person who kind of ran around the neighborhood right before saying, the sky is falling, now what are we going to do? Are we going to get together before this happens? And so that kind of places her in the right place, that when it does happen, people do go to her for guidance. And she does become the leader of this group of people from a neighborhood. It's not a huge group, it's a small group. They weren't hit as hard as everybody else, and they survived. And, they're in mourning, basically, at the very beginning. They're in mourning. They've lost everything they understand about how our government functions, how we get our basic needs met. I mean, water, food, shelter. Those three things they keep coming up and up and up as the series progresses, because things are gone. The things we've learned to rely on.
And that's another thing too with this type of sci-fi, is that there's a lot of research behind it. And I mean, when you start researching things and you start getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the World Wide Web or wherever else you're looking, do you kind of find yourself saying to yourself, man, I'm putting together a good book, not only because I'm doing all this research, but just because it's so close to something that could actually happen,
Absolutely. And it's frightening. It's frightening.
Yeah.
The first book reveals midway through that we've caused a huge climate crisis, and there's a nuclear winter. And I took one scenario of the nuclear winter. There are many. What will happen, after the bombs drop. And one is, everything starts, there's so much debris in the air that the sun can't get in. And it literally causes, in the series, nuclear winter. So in Monte, California, where there is no such thing as snow, it's all of a sudden snowing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, you know, the Earth is fighting back. It's trying to reemerge it into a healthy place, but it takes a long time to get there.
So now you have something that may be similar to this that you've already written too. It's called Mechanism. Is that true?
Mechanicalism, yes. That it's also it's kind of a combination horror and science fiction, and it is it's not as realistic as the Survivor Diaries for sure. That's about it's twofold. We see two stories emerging at the same time. One is from the 17th century, and it's about a man who actually, this was a lot of historical research too, he builds automatons, and they were very, very sophisticated back then. I know most of us would think no, but they were actually the forefathers of the modern day computer. So that story ends up intertwining with a modern day tale of a woman who is in a plastic bubble. She's a scientist, and because she's in this bubble, there's this plague that has been released that has something to do with the automatons and the man who created them. And she's safe in the bubble, but she's finding herself in need of figuring out how to stop this apocalypse from happening.
So is this like a steampunk kind of genre?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it has lots of steampunk. I mean, it's got so much of everything. I mean, it has some very rooted history. And then it's just brought in a kind of odd sort of way where she lives in San Francisco, she's working, you know, and the people outside her bubble are dying, and there's no one to bring her food. There's no one to keep her little atmosphere going. She has to find a way to turn things around.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I don't want to like project myself onto this, but I really do like the steampunk genre because it is so unique. Okay, it's almost because it's not necessarily apocalyptic, and it's not necessarily like sci-fi, and it's not necessarily history. It's almost like everything has been thrown together. And I kind of, because it always seems to me when you read a steampunk novel, it does seem like it's like in a dystopian world, but it's not. It's just a different timeline than what we're living in. And so it's like, you know, anybody who's ever read steampunk, basically what it is if we had not invented the technology we have today and we still lived on the steam engines and things like that, that's where the whole concept comes from. But anyhow, that whole thing does kind of feel, you know, dystopian in a way because it's almost like you're still kind of struggling, you know, in that society. And there's all these little small societies, but it still kind of keeps with the historical monarchies and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I love steampunk. I think it's awesome.
This one has a little twist to that. The steampunk, I don't want to say format, but it does have a twist there that it's right after this apocalypse, this plague has been let loose that was created in the 17th century. And those characters they come forward into our timeline. And so, but it's a very short period of time after that's been released and people are starting to die. So yes, it does. I love apocalypse. I don't know, call me crazy, because something about exploring that makes me feel a little safer because I have a little bit more control when I write. So it's like, yes, the whole world is ending, but I am in control of how it's ending and what happens.
Yeah, and it's
so I kind of,
and it does make you kind of really think because, I mean, honestly, over the course of the last 10 years, if anybody says that they're out there that have not thought about it once, okay, ever since the Y2K bug, we have all thought about it at some point. And, you know, just how it happens. It may be a meteor from the sky. It may be a nuclear bomb. It may be our technology falls off. Any one of those scenarios would leave you in a dystopian society where either A, a new government would emerge, B, you would have to rebuild your entire life from square one, or C, you would have to come up with creative ways to survive, okay? And
Or D, all of the above.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, or all of the above. You know, no, not one thing would only happen. Okay, you wouldn't be able to have a good day like that. But, but yeah, I mean, I like the way that you write and you do a lot of research with this. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you. And yeah, that book, it's a short, fun. I think most people could read Mechanicalism in one read through in a day, and I kind of think it's a satisfying arc as far as these two characters who actually have found themselves both imprisoned in a different way and actually parallel each other, yet they're 400 years apart. And there's a lot going on there, yes. And part of the steampunk is it's like this big soup where you're throwing in all these ingredients, mixing them up in a crazy, chaotic pot, and then boom, what do the characters do?
Yeah, it's almost like that game, the Sims game, where you just kind of let them run, and you put in the tools, and you put in all the things to see what would happen, and then you start to realize that, you know, not only does it help build your characters, it gives them something to either make good choices about or make bad choices about. And that's one thing I talked about on this show not too long ago, was when you take a world and you put a dome over it and you say, okay, what's going to happen within this small world that you've created in your own mind? That's why I like fantasy too, is the choices that are made are not the same exactly that would be made in our modern reality, okay? In a different fantasy world, anything goes, you know, and it's cool because you can see what your characters do. They take on a life of their own.
They don't always do what you think they're going to do. Sometimes they throw you, and you're like, why'd you do that? Now I have to think of all these new ways to get you out of this or get you further into this. Why'd you do that to me? But yeah, exactly.
So out of all the books that you've written, okay, because you've written quite a bit, who would be a character that would represent you?
Laura Patton in the Survivor Diaries. That was my first book. She has my background, so that made it a little bit easier. Going into the first book, obviously it's total fiction, but just to know her thought process is very similar to my thought process. But in truth, all of the characters are me. They're all coming out of me. So good, bad, or whatever, it's all for me. But yes, I think the closest is Laura Patton.
Wow. So because of all the books you've written, and I'm still looking at this list, like it's hard to take it all in at one time. So with all the books that you have written, when did you decide that you had this talent to write, and when did you start utilizing it?
I have always created stories in my head, and even before I could read or write, they were there. And I think for a little child, that's part of a way to control your environment and, you know, make sense of the world. And even as an adult, same thing. So I didn't start writing until later, but I have a degree in film, and that's all about storytelling. So I've always had the storytelling bug, and I really enjoy doing it in novel form. It gives me a chance not to have to worry about a lot of the technicalities. I can do whatever I want. My character, they can do whatever I can think of. I'm only limited by my own imagination.
Now, does it like play out in a movie in your own mind, or do you go through the process of the actual emotions and feelings and senses that the characters would have?
The latter, absolutely the latter. A combination of the two, but more so that when I am living these characters, I'm feeling it. I mean, even I'd never smelled burning hair. I took some of my own hair and I lit on fire. I mean, you have to immerse yourself in the senses and really figure out what these characters are going through to make them real, to make people interested in them. And that's a lot of it. I do something very strange. I actually have a little graphics business, and for each of my books now, not at the beginning, but now I start to make graphics around the books as I'm writing. And that helps me to develop a lot more visually, especially. Something the skirt's flowing in a certain way because I'm actually seeing it flow. So that's kind of a different thing, I think.
And that's kind of interesting too, because you build graphics around it. I wonder, I mean, in this technologically advanced world, because we have social media out there, okay, I wonder what it would take to build up your characters within a social media network. Like, say, for example, you were to take like 2 or 3 of your main characters and put them up on a Facebook page or a Twitter page and play out their lives and see what type of interactions you get from that, just to see how your characters react. And honestly, you would have to play each one of your characters, which would actually be a kind of a neat way to do things. But I wonder if that would be something that you would like try out as a writer who may be just brand new starting out, is to put your character on a social media network and say, okay, this is so-and-so, here's their life, maybe even take some pictures of their surroundings, or create, like you do with your graphics, create their surroundings so you can basically play out their story on an online forum.
I love that idea. I think you just wrote my next book. I think that would be a fabulous thing to be able to do, because you do embody, and sometimes the person that is closest to you is too easy. The struggles are with those who aren't as close to you, and I think that'd be more interesting, to take your villain.
Oh yeah.
Put them out there and say, hey, see how people respond to you with all of your shenanigans, and my friends would think I'd gone utterly mad.
Yeah, and be careful with that, folks. If anybody's out there trying this, okay, don't be like, all right, here's the dead body that I've put into the trunk, and I'm just down the road from this such and such. You don't want police showing up to your house as playing your villain.
Yeah, it's an old writer's joke. Hopefully nobody checks my Google history. Because we'd all be locked up together.
Yeah.
I have literally gone into some of the craziest things and fallen into some pages that I wasn't comfortable with. And so let your friends know what you're doing if you do that technique.
Yeah, and that's another thing is some authors will put up on Twitter or even on Facebook, they focus their Twitter or their Facebook around either a book series or a book. So it's not unusual to see authors kind of step back away from the characters that they've created just to display the work that they've done. It would definitely have to be something that you would have to think about. But, I mean, I get too off onto tangents when I get ideas. But
I think that's a fabulous, hey, you've got my wheels in my brain going, woo. I mean, even that idea would be an interesting book to come out with. Kind of this person with all these aspects of characters running around in their brain, and then putting it out there and seeing what happens.
Oh, yeah.
You could cause a lot of chaos that way.
Yeah, it would be a great way to even build up a book. Now, I do have another couple of questions, because you had mentioned graphic design, the fact that you build up graphics with your characters. What have you done with that graphic type of design? Do you do any type of marketing with it? I mean, what?
If they come out the way I really envision them, I use them for my marketing. Absolutely. I use them for teasers as I'm working. So I have a lot out already on Dissonance of the Dead, and I'm only about halfway through the writing. And people are like, ooh, okay, when is that coming out? So I kind of throw it out there to them and reel in a few interesting pictures. Yeah, I try to use those when I'm doing that, because I think in our society, no one goes without being visual. I mean, I understand there are people who are blind, but even, through description. And people are drawn to visuals. We live in a very, 24/7, we're in front of one screen or another, and we're super visual. And so I think that is the way we've learned to interact with these still or moving images. Yeah, obviously film and television and.
Well, see, and I had a teacher. I had a teacher way, way, way back, right? And his whole philosophy was, we have become lazy in our society because we rely too much on what is given to us through our eyes, and we don't focus too much on our emotional and other physical senses. And he's like, and in a book, you can find that. And I think he was reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And at the time, I fell in love with it. I was amazed by the way that he was reading this book because of the fact that it was surprising to me that he was able to describe things and plant images in my head without me even having to see anything. And granted, not every kid in that classroom was feeling or seeing the same things I was in my head. I was taking bits and pieces of things that I knew at the young age of 7 and realizing, okay, I can put together this. I know what snow looks like. I know what a lamppost looks like. I know what a wardrobe looks like. But it's my own version of it. And that's the greatest part about reading is even though you can put a visual label on things, like say, for example, you can go ahead and you can make graphics about what you see it as, or we can sit in a movie theater and watch a movie. There's always one or two people that come out of that movie theater, especially after reading the book, that say, you know what, that was okay, but it wasn't exactly what I envisioned. And that's the greatest part about opening up a book and reading it, because it's your own vision. Even as a reader, and a writer is giving you a story, you're still going to think about things a little bit differently based on your own background. So, I mean, with this Opus of the Dead series, okay, I was envisioning probably something different than you were, but it was still satisfying. You know what I'm saying?
And that is our hope as writers, is that we can get across what we are visually seeing into words. I mean, that connection is vital. Everybody does take something different away from a book. I've had people come to me and say, were you talking about this and this at that time? And in this part of the book, and I'm like, no, but hey, I like that.
Yeah.
And if that's what's good. I'm glad you found that way of connecting with those characters and the story itself. So yeah, I think that we are a little too visual. I agree, but for me, it's part of my writing process. And as we were talking about how I was able to write the sounds of the song.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe somebody who is deaf could actually feel the sound better through this description. That is really important. And it is this is me taking in information and putting it together in the context of a story and seeing how others respond.
Well, I want to thank you again for being here on the show. You have done an excellent job in the way that you describe things. And I'm not sure if it's something in the water out there in Steinbeck country that's causing you to be like this, but it's working. So definitely keep pushing through and keep doing what you do. You said you have another book coming out, the Opus of the Dead series, Dissonance of the Dead, correct?
Yes.
Now,
yes, hopefully by the end of the year.
All right. So with all the writing that you've done, with all the descriptions that you've had to pull from your own psyche to build up in characters on paper, what advice would you give an author who's getting started? And, and that's the thing. When you meet an author like you who does so well at describing things in a way that they do, it can be intimidating to somebody who's brand new who says, well, there's just no way I could ever describe something like that. What would be some advice that you would give somebody like that?
I think a lot of people would say, just write what you're feeling. And of course that's true, but I would say, get more specific. I would say turn off the lights in your house, turn off anything that has noise, and go into your story and try to use all of your senses. What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you hearing? What are you physically touching? And what is tangible? What is not? And start to grow from there. And I think if you can do it right, like I do, right before I wake up, for real in the morning, you're kind of groggy. Mm-hmm. That seems to be my best time, that lucid bit of time where I know I'm trying to work on a story, but I'm not feeling rushed to get out of bed and write it. Mm-hmm. Use that time. You're relaxed. Let it come to you. Don't force it.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. It was a pleasure having you here on the show. It really was a great talk.
Yes, thank you so much. I had a great time.
And I want to remind everybody out there to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. I also want to remind you to check out the Opus of the Dead and any of the other books that Lynn Lamb has worked on. Lynn, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Emit.
All right, and this is Emit Blackwell signing out. Keep on reading and keep on writing, my friends.
Searching the web for the most talented, creative, and intriguing independent authors.
The Emit Blackwell Show, diving into the creative minds of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and paranormal authors. Their fantasy is our reality.